I've got to note right off the bat that I didn't really know what to expect when Magic Legends was originally announced to be in development from a little-known developer by the name of Cryptic Studios. I'd only ever heard Cryptic's name before in relation to City of Heroes. Talk about a blast from the past. I remember seeing copies of that game being sold in Toys R Us and Walmart in the electronics department years ago. While Cryptic has had some good days, they've mostly faded into obscurity over the past 15 years, with their studio mostly focused on making rather generic online licensed games. So seeing them attached to a more AAA scale game based on Magic the Gathering was a bit of a surprise. I don't think anyone, even people in the Magic the Gathering community, really expected this particular game. I'll be entirely honest, I don't really play Magic. I dabbled a bit back from around 2009 to 2011, mostly playing with my friends who collected and played themselves, but it was far more their game than it was mine. I enjoyed it just for the social experience, not really for the game itself. So my interest in Magic Legends has been mostly from the perspective of someone who rather enjoys ARPG games like Diablo and Gauntlet Dark Legacy. So the main point of discussion today will not center around how faithful Magic Legends is to the source material, but rather its enjoyability as what it is. A AAA-produced free-to-play action RPG. So, let's start at the beginning, with the character creation process, or really the lack thereof. Character customization in this game is almost non-existent. The character creation process consists of maybe 6 to 10 options each for hair color, hairstyle, face, skin color, etc. Character cosmetics have almost all been locked off as premium purchasable items. One of the main pillars that defines any great or decent RPG, even an ARPG, is the extent and complexity of its character creation interface. Instead of having half a dozen different preset eye colors, I'd prefer players had access to RGB sliders or some kind of color wheel, where you can fine-tune the exact tint and intensity of the color to your liking. Once you finalize your character, you proceed to the tutorial, which sadly is not skippable. But at the very least, the game does bombard you with a fair bit of story progression and lore introduction to keep things moving. So even if you're familiar with how to play an ARPG game, at least you're not entirely wasting your time with the tutorial, which is nice. There are a few things I dislike more in a game than excessive handholding, especially when it comes in the form of an overly long tutorial or a set of tutorials. One of the things that you do actually benefit from learning about in the tutorial is how cards work. While the tutorial doesn't do much more than cover the basic need-to-know fundamentals, it's still a nice addition to those that don't play a lot of card-based action RPG games. The card system was one of the things that initially struck me as interesting about this game, and helps it stand apart from other notable ARPGs. Instead of relying on the same handful of cooldown abilities on a centralized menu, the card system here is designed explicitly with the intent of incentivizing players to constantly alternate between your ever-growing deck of cards, giving you a degree of combat variety, rather than exclusively rely on a meager handful. And from both a visual and gameplay perspective, all of these combat cards stand out as mostly unique from one another, which is no easy thing to do from a design perspective. Speaking of combat, I'll give the game some mostly unfiltered praise in this area, as the combat does feel really good. In those inconsistent and arguably infrequent moments, the game provides you with an adequate challenge. The synergy between different character classes can result in some pretty visually amazing and useful combos. None but the largest of enemy hordes can really hope to compete against the total collective power of 4 different sets of minions from each player, let alone the 4 players that casted said minions. However, there's a clear trade-off. The amount of visual effects on screen at times, especially when players are comboing abilities at once, can be so excessive at times you literally cannot tell what the hell is going on. I know some people point to games like Overwatch as an example of audio-visual spam, but where there's simply too much going on at once, but trust me, games like Overwatch have nothing on Magic Legends in this area. It's so confusing, even the developers have had to come out with vague promises that they are investigating the issue and discussing possible solutions internally. I was a bit disappointed with the world design in this game, which is a bit surprising as anyone who's ever played the card game would probably tell you. The actual Magic the Gathering world is visually and descriptively pretty interesting and vivid, compared to most fantasy settings. I got really bored looking at most of the world on display so far. Some of the creature designs are pretty solid, but honestly that's not enough to excuse the generic worlds themselves. But that's honestly just not enough to excuse the generic world design itself. But the biggest disappointment I've observed in-game so far has been the insanely generic design philosophy of the story quests. The quests in the game have been almost entirely identical, save for some dialogue variation. They all follow the exact same formula. Do 4 to 5 fetch quests where an NPC tells you, go here or destroy these relics or objects. You spend 5 to 10 minutes just walking from A to B. You fight some minions, you do the thing, you come back, After 4 or 5 fetch quests, you do a boss battle quest. You defeat the boss, you go back to the original quest giver of that world, and then they send you off to another world in need of your help. Also, it doesn't help that you spend the majority of your time in-game walking from point A to point B. Even after you unlock all the fast travel points, which in of itself requires quite a bit of walking around, you're still going to be spending at least a few minutes at a time walking from the nearest fast travel portal to your next quest. And during that time, in most cases, hardly anything happens. If I was playing something like Diablo or any other RPG, I wouldn't go further than a few hundred meters outside the main social hub without running into at least a few enemies or some kind of random event. Here, there is way too much downtime. We need more random encounter type events, more mini-bosses and elite enemies that just roam around the world. We need world bosses, an actual dungeon system, etc. I get that Magic Legends clearly wants to draw a fine line between being an ARPG and being a MMORPG, and instead wants to be viewed as something like a MMO-light title. But if you're going to design your game around being online only, at least incorporate some of the features that comprise any decent MMO. I mean, let's be honest, Destiny 2 of all games has more in common with your traditional MMORPG than Magic Legends does, and those are words I'd never thought I'd utter, if you asked me a few years ago. Also, on a related note, one of the things that really annoyed me was the excessively long loading times. You can sometimes be waiting minutes at a time just to load into a world. At one point, at the beginning of a loading screen, I got up to go to the bathroom, go downstairs, get a drink, pet my kitties, check my phone, walk back upstairs, and sit back down in my chair, and the game was still loading. We're talking a span of around 4 to 5 minutes. I'm perfectly fine with waiting 30 seconds or a minute to load, if I'm loading into a fairly large world, but Legends tests my patience to the extreme in this regard. I'm hoping that this will be addressed in due time, but it hasn't been yet, and it's been about a week now, so I don't feel bad about mentioning it here. The voice acting in this game, from many of the NPC characters you'll interact with, ranges from decent to really cringeworthy, depending on the character in question. I don't think anyone watching this would really expect Hollywood-level vocal performances by any of the voice actors attached to the game, but given the amount of tediously constructed exposition bombarded in your direction at any given time, I felt it was a relevant matter to mention. One of the notable aspects to any MMO game has always been the leveling up of your chosen character, or characters depending on whether you stick to a single preferred character, or alternatively whether you choose to master a small multitude of characters. However, here in Legends, leveling overall brings with it only really minor stat increases in regards to a meager handful of certain passive stats. I mean, having 1% more health and stamina is nice, same for a similarly small increase in the health of my casted friendly minions, but it's by no means exciting, nor does it really significantly influence the course of any given battle or situation for me, or anyone else running missions with me. I was hoping for a little bit more in some form. As for exactly what, I don't know. But leveling up is a critical moment for one's character, and it should be. And it should bring with it more than just vague increases in name only. I don't recall seeing such a boring leveling system since I played Crucible before Amazon made the only viable choice and pulled the plug on that game prematurely. Another area I was rather let down by was the options menu. The options menu is almost non-existent. Visual effects consist of just high, medium, low. Audio just allows you to turn on or off music and sound effects. No scaling options have, as of yet, been implemented, which is really annoying. Depending on your audio setup, you might want to have the ability to raise or lower the volume of the sound effects, almost always lowering it in my case, without going all in and disabling it. Same goes for visual effects. While some might be fine with the high, medium, low approach, it's not an ideal solution. What if you want to maintain the high quality of the world but keep the density of vegetation down in order to conserve the drain on your GPU? What if you only want medium level visual effects on your combat abilities rather than high quality? Most games will provide you with at least half a dozen specific video effects options specific to the game and the anticipated demands of the player base. But here the developers leave players with very little control over their experience, which is a definite red flag in my book. Chat filtering would have been another option that should have been included. Most MMOs and MMO lights have for decades now made it easy to enable or disable chat, filter chat to either public, party, friends only, etc. But Legends includes none of these. Whether you like it or not, be prepared to consistently bear witness to everything anyone in the region is saying, whether you want to or not, which can be quite the immersion killer if you don't want to be constantly dealing with that all the time. One of the biggest areas of concern and criticism hurled at the game, from what I've seen so far, is the implementation of microtransactions. I think it's appropriate to say that microtransactions have always been key to the MMO and MMO-light genres. People staunchly pretend that prior to the 2010s, we never saw microtransactions as they were just exclusively a modern invention, when in reality us millennials have been dealing with microtransactions in some form or another, like paid expansion packs, map packs, etc., since at least the onset of the new millennium. I'm not inherently strictly opposed to microtransactions, assuming they fulfill two basic categories. Number one, they are not inherently exploitative, as has been the case with loot boxes. And secondly, they do not directly contribute to a system of haves and have-nots. This mostly rolls out map packs and expansion packs, assuming the expansion pack is a continuation of an existing campaign, and not just a new campaign entirely, which I'm more forgiving of. I'd hate it if I invested dozens of hours into an MMO, only to find that the fifth concluding act of the story campaign was reserved behind a paywall. Magic Legends doesn't restrict any story content nor any worlds behind paywalls, which is nice. However, it does do this weird thing where it hides one of the playable character classes as a random loot box unlock. This is obviously a definite no-no from me. Other games like Genshin Impact have hid characters behind loot boxes before, but at least with Genshin Impact, number one, it wasn't that hard to build up currency to buy loot boxes for free in the first place, and number two, Genshin Impact has so many characters that are functionally similar, if not arguably identical to one another, that unlocking a new character feels more like unlocking a new character skin rather than an actual original distinct character. And I've seen a fair number of players comparing the two games. Genshin Impact has its faults, and I'll be the first to admit it, but arguably it is slightly better about its monetization than this game is. The developers, prior to the launch of Legends, made the public promise that cards will not be sold as a premium item, but rather earned through in-game progression and by participating in in-game activities. All well and good in principle, right? Well, there's a little caveat there that they were careful not to explicitly mention. While you can currently acquire cards exclusively for free, at least to the best of my knowledge so far, upgrading the cards you have to increase their potency and effectiveness can indeed cost money. Card upgrades are available both for free and as quest and activity rewards, and can also be bought with either in-game or premium real-life currency, making their claims of transparency little more than weasel words at best. Additionally, other gameplay-affecting things can be purchased for real money, such as additional deck slots, which expands the total number of cards you can own, which obviously has a direct impact on your combat. Experience boosters have likewise been added, incentivizing players to spend money to more quickly gain gold, experience, and other rewards. As if one-time XP boosters weren't enough, Legends offers two distinct XP booster varieties: a mission rewards booster and an enemy rewards booster, meaning if you want to maximize your gains, you have to buy both fairly regularly. Else, otherwise, you'll just have to accept that you'll constantly be on the lower half of the two-tiered system. These booster packs come in two varieties, a cheaper option and a more expensive option. The cheaper one will cost 500 Zen and the other 2,000, aka $5 or $20, depending on which you buy. Each boost only lasts for 30 minutes, so if you're looking to commit to a 4-hour-long binge, which in of itself is not uncommon among the demographic that generally plays these kinds of games, prepare to spend about $10 an hour, aka $40, for which price you can instead buy any number of good games out there instead. And because I know I'm probably going to hear this bullshit if I don't explicitly head it off here and now, yes, you can always choose to play for free without buying into the XP boosters and stuff. You don't quote-unquote need them in order to enjoy the game. It's a fairly nonsensical argument. It's like the age-old, well, the game is free, the developers slaved away to make this for you and you're giving them shit for it. No, neither the developers nor the publishers are running this as a non-profit. They're not a charity. They're not interested in handouts. They're primarily focused on turning a profit, and that in of itself is not inherently a bad thing, as long as they offer a reasonably good product that isn't inherently designed first and foremost to prey on people's wallets. When you start enforcing maximum limits for how much gold or XP I can farm in a single day, and design your game from the top down to be as grindy as possible, while offering a paid workaround for people to skip the excessive grind that you created, also stripping away a lot of content and features behind paywalls, which we'll get to next, I don't feel morally obligated to come running to your defense. Following up on that, other more quality of life oriented features have been locked off behind paywalls, including the ability to change your character's name, additional cosmetic slots, additional character slots, etc. Now, I might be normally willing to budge on maybe one of these being a paid option, like additional character slots. That's not unheard of, but certainly not changing the character's name. Personally, I'd go the more established route and say, you know what, players can't change their character name more than once every 30 days or something, and maybe have it cost a considerable amount of free in-game currency. But I wouldn't say, hey, you want to change your name? Okay, open up your wallet. No, that just seems pointlessly excessive. As for the ultimate question of whether Magic Legends is worth your time investment and potentially your hard-earned money if you choose to spend money on it, I'm honestly really torn because I've gone back and forth internally about how I feel about this game more than I do in the case of almost any other game I've reviewed in the past year. There's a lot I like about it, and I definitely want to like it, but it feels too incomplete and unbalanced for me to recommend it just yet. I would say if you're planning to give it a go anyway, by all means, it's free, so it won't cost you anything there. But as for me, I feel perfectly content just waiting it out to see if the developers do some serious course correction, which I think they're perfectly capable of doing, or if they're just going to go prioritize short-term gains over maintaining a healthy long-term investment, which would be stupid, but it's also possible. And on that note, that's where I'm going to wrap it up for today. Magic Legends is by no means this dreadfully awful Diablo wannabe clone game. Anyone who looks at this and sees it as nothing more than a complete one-for-one replication of Diablo needs to be evaluated for psychiatric evaluation, because clearly they have trouble distinguishing reality from illusion. That said, Legends is a game most held back by its own lack of daring. Aside from the card system being its one standout gimmick, and a good gimmick at that, it doesn't do enough to warrant a player's long-term interest. Is it a bad game? No. Is it a good game? Not really. It is the epitome of mediocrity. But maybe you disagree, maybe you find it more worthy of ire than I do. I'm not the sole voice out there, you can definitely have your opinion on it. I could see why some people would definitely like it, but for me, I'm just kind of neutral at this point. The game just fails to stroke the flames of my anger. Instead, it just does something arguably worse. It bores me. It is the perfect game to play when one is awaiting the onset of sleep. Regardless, I'll be curious to hear where you stand in the comments down below. I welcome all points of view, whether I necessarily agree with them or not. I enjoy the debate, I enjoy the back and forth conversation, and I do try to go out of my way to respond to as many comments as I can across all my videos. Sometimes it's not always possible, but more times than not, if you leave a comment, I will usually respond to it in a fairly short period of time. If you want to support the work I do on the channel, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell to get notified when I upload future videos. All I ask is that if you enjoy this kind of content, at least consider subscribing and clicking the bell, because YouTube makes it really hard for small creators like me to grow, and doing both of those things somewhat forces YouTube to make sure you see my content when it goes live. My current end-of-year plan is to cross over 2,000 subscribers. That's my goal, and I've been committing to it for a while. Earlier this year, I made a public pledge that if this channel crosses over 2,000 subscribers by December 31st, 2021, I will donate $100 to the Team Trees nonprofit initiative, a group dedicated to reducing our carbon footprint and repairing the damage done by environmental disasters by planting millions of new trees every year. So if you want to help me do a little good and give back to the world, there's never reason to subscribe and nudge me a little closer to fulfilling my goal. This is WarriorDan signing out. Stay awesome, everybody. Stay safe, and peace out.